a few of them here. Obviously, we won't get to all of them. I'll be looking them through as we're going in the rebuttals and doing my best to be fair about the distribution. Here we have two 15-minute rebuttals. Dr. Gish is first.
Well, Dr. Fisher said that he wasn't going to accuse me of lying, but I just wasn't telling the truth. I don't know what the difference is. Maybe what he's saying that he just doesn't agree with me. Well, I agree. He doesn't agree with me. But I'm certainly, as far as I can determine, I am telling the truth. Now, he urged you to get some books and study. I agree with that. And out on the book table here in the foyer, you will find some books from our institute. And our statements and our material are thoroughly referenced. And we give the complete references there. So you can check up and see whether we are telling the truth. Now, one thing I want to straighten out, as far as I understood Dr. Fisher to say, he said that I said we couldn't know anything about the past. I did not say that. We certainly can know much about the past. We know about Caesar and Shakespeare and George Washington, and we know that there are sedimentary deposits that contain billions and billions of dead things, and this sedimentary material was laid down out of water. Now, we know that. That's in the past. What I said was this: you cannot construct a scientific theory about events in the past, because that is an evolution or origin, because there were no human witnesses. It's not repeatable. You can't go in the laboratory. Dr. Fisher would make no claim to go in the laboratory and have some experiment try to generate a universe to see if his theory is right, or to see if he can change a fish into an amphibian, of course. And he said we got to use a scientific method. I agree 100% with Dr. Fisher. I use a scientific method. I never assumed in my biochemistry that God had to come down and perform some supernatural process for me. No. What happens now must have happened in the past and will happen in the future. That's in the real world. That's in the here and now. That's the stuff out there. But Dr. Fisher wants to step outside of the limits of empirical science. He wants to step back in the unobservable past and claim that he knows the basic method of origin that had to be by some natural process. How does he know that? If God exists, creation is not only logical and plausible, it's inevitable. And so how can he exclude creation? How can you keep creation out of school? You're demanding that all of our students think as atheists. When they think about origins, they must think as atheists. Now he says you can have evolution with God. Well, not the God that I know. Evolution is based upon two processes: genetic mistakes, producing all these horrible things, all kinds of genetic diseases, sickle cell anemia, diabetes, blindness, sterility, and every other horrible thing. And I know Dr. Fisher would not want to subject himself or his children to any of these mutations. I know that. The evolution says, well, almost all these mutations are bad, but once in a while, just by accident, one just happens to be good. And then you have the good mutant has to enter into this competition with the original. How does he kill off the original? How does he get rid of the original? By killing them all, by their death. And so evolution is based upon these two processes, these mutation process, which and mutation do occur, of course. But I'm certain not the process that God used to create. Would God use such a horrible, inefficient process to create? I can't think of anything more inefficient than this process of evolution. Dumbing along billions of years with all these horrible things happening, and just once in a while one just happens to be good, and then you have this competition for survival and you kill off all the others, and that's the way how we got here. You want to believe in evolution? That's your business, but don't blame it on God. Now, he says that no scientist ever claims to know the truth or should ever make that claim. Did you hear him say that evolution is a fact? I heard him say that. I believe that's what he said. That is just would be completely reasonable to assume that evolution is a fact. Well, that's knowing the truth, isn't it? And no evolutionist, nobody should ever make such a claim. But that is what is being done today The universities are teaching evolution as a fact, unquestioned. Now he said, if any scientist could disprove evolution, he'd get the Nobel Prize. Or if any evolutionists could disprove, or anyone scientist could disprove the Big Bang, he'd get the Nobel Prize. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe in evolution, if you don't proclaim evolution to be a fact, you can't even get your articles published, let alone win a Nobel Prize. You can't even go against the Big Bang dogma and get your articles published. Even a Nobel Prize winner can't do that. Hannes Alfvén, Nobel Prize winning physicist at the University of California in San Diego. An evolution Nobel Prize winner, but he does not interpret the Big Bang in the way that's done dogmatically. He believes that the redshift is because of some other reason, and so forth. He just does not agree with the way the Big Bang is interpreted. He has claimed that he can't get his scientific papers published because of the dogma surrounding this Big Bang theory. Now, Dr. Fisher said that we have this Big Bang theory, and you have the Big Bang and all this material goes out there in a homogeneous fashion. You have this material distributed in a homogeneous fashion. That's why the background radiation should be homogeneous, that is, it should be smooth. They predicted the background radiation. They predicted it would be the same in every direction where you look, because we start out with a homogeneous cloud of hydrogen gas. And so the whimper left over should be homogeneous. When you look out here and you measure that radiation, or you look out here and you measure the background radiation, it should be the same everywhere you look. Sure enough, it is. Fits theory perfectly. The problem is, the theory doesn't fit the real universe. The real universe is totally different. I'm surprised that Dr. Fisher would mention that. He said that's his field. Where has he been? Has he not been reading scientific journals? Has he even been reading the newspapers lately? They found this huge super cluster of galaxies. A very significant portion of the matter of the universe in this huge supercluster of galaxies over here, 300 million light years of nothing. The universe is incredibly lumpy. And therefore the background radiation should not be uniform. It should be more intense in certain areas of the sky than others. But it isn't. And they looked and they looked and they looked and they hoped and they hoped and they hoped that it was the same everywhere. Then they send this spacecraft up there in orbit. They've got their telescopes scanning the sky and hoping that they would find variations in the background radiation, and it is perfectly the same wherever you look. And they're saying there's something wrong with their Big Bang theory. It's like we may have to give up on it and think of something else. And he said, the data fit the theory perfectly. Well, it may fit the theory perfectly, but it didn't fit the real universe. Totally contradicted by the facts of science. Now he says, no problem with the second law of thermodynamics. After all, crystallization occurs. You go from a dissolved solution to a highly ordered crystal. Well, I have to say, if a scientist doesn't know the difference between crystallization and evolution, I don't think I can help him very much. Because they are diametrically opposed. In crystallization, the substance is going to a lower level of energy, a lower energy level, to a more probable state. That's why you cool water to freeze it. You take energy out of it. But evolution is going in the opposite direction. It's going to higher and higher levels of energy content, to less and less probable states of matter. Here's a quote from Prigozhin, Nobel Prize winner in physics, a man who was working on this problem. Just like Dr. Fisher says, and evolution says evolution is a fact, the second law is a fact, second law of thermodynamics is a fact. Of course there's no contradiction between the two. Well, if you believe that, I would have to say you wouldn't believe there's a contradiction, but they can never explain why there is no contradiction. They just proclaim it. Now, this Nobel Prize winner is working on the problem. He certainly hasn't come close to solving the problem yet, but this is what he says about crystallization. This article was published in Physics Today, November 1972, beginning on page 23. Dr. Prigozhin says, the point is that in a non-isolated system, there exists a possibility for formation of ordered, low-entropy structures at sufficiently low temperatures. This ordering principle is responsible for the appearance of ordered structures such as crystals, as well as the phenomena of phase transitions. Unfortunately, this principle cannot explain the formation of biological structures. The probability that at ordinary temperatures, a macroscopic number of molecules is assembled to give rise to the highly ordered structures and to the coordinated functions characterizing living organisms is vanishingly small. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no relationship between crystallization and evolution. Evolution requires not only order, like if you punch a typewriter, you get A, B, 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 you say you have order. But there's no information there. You have no complexity. You have no ordered complexity at all, you see. To arrange the amino acids in the order to give an enzyme, you have to have complete freedom. The molecules of water are locked into a system. They have no choice. They can go and do only one thing. They're locked into that crystal. But to get the amino acids to make a protein, you have to have complete freedom to arrange them to get the precise order. There's no relationship whatsoever. Now, he said, another thing to get around the second law of thermodynamics is an open system and you bring in energy. That's all. He contradicted himself. He gave the example of Mars. What did he say? Up there on Mars, you didn't get any complex molecules. Why? Because you had all of that ultraviolet light coming right down to the surface of Mars, and that would destroy those molecules. Absolutely correct. I totally agree. Well, wait a minute. What he said is all you need is energy coming in. That's all. Well, there's the energy coming in. There's all that ultraviolet light that fulfills criteria. But you didn't get any light. You didn't get any molecules. You didn't get one single molecule of anything on Mars. Because ultraviolet is deadly. It's destructive. Raw, uncontrolled energy is destructive. It is not constructive. And on the hypothetical primordial Earth, you have no ozone, no oxygen, no ozone. And so the ultraviolet light would come right down to the surface of the Earth, and that ultraviolet light would destroy everything. The Mars was a perfect test, a perfect example, where we had an experiment with no organic chemist to influence the result, and it was totally, absolutely negative for evolution. We found exactly what the creation scientists said we find up there, absolutely nothing. And yet the evolution said if you have that atmosphere, you have energy flowing through it, you're going to get molecules, you're going to get life. Absolutely, totally contradicted by the facts. I knew the first picture to come back from Mars, I knew immediately there's no life there on Mars. Why, if we get life on Mars, there'd be a great big sign up there saying, Yankee, go home. Now, he says it's possible to falsify something. It's not possible to prove anything, yet he says evolution is a fact. I don't know how he's proved it. Doesn't know the mechanism. Certainly don't have the fossil record. Absolutely, the fossil record falsifies evolution theory. It shows that evolution has not taken place. Now, one can insist you've got to believe in some non-theistic or atheistic theory to explain the origin of life on this earth. That is a religious view. That's his religious view. Now he says if you want to go to church, and you want to go to Sunday school, and you want to study the Bible there, you can learn about creation. But in the public schools, you got to teach science. I agree. Ladies and gentlemen, the churches are paid for by private donations. We can teach anything we want to in our churches. The buildings are paid for, the land is paid for, the teachers and everything are paid for by our private donations. But the public schools are supported by tax money of all of us. They don't belong to Dr. Fisher. They don't belong to the evolution. They belong to all of us. And the vast majority of American people want creation taught in the schools. And a very significant number of scientists are creationists. And to have evolution taught as a fact in the public schools is satisfying the suggestion of only 8% of the population of the United States, as a national poll has shown, only 8% want evolution only taught in the schools. 76% wants both taught, and another 10% wants creation only taught. That's 86% of the American people want creation taught in the schools. What are these evolutionists afraid of? Why can't they have what we've had here tonight? A full and free discussion of both sides. Are the students too ignorant, too illiterate to be able to absorb this information and decide for themselves which is more credible? Do we have to indoctrinate them and brainwash them to make sure then that they learn the truth, which is evolution, and protect them from error? That is what Dr. Fisher is saying. I say, teach our students how to think, not what to think. Give them all the information on both sides of this controversy. Let them decide for themselves which is more credible and which is more reasonable. That's good science. That's good education. And that's fully in accord with academic and religious freedom supposedly guaranteed by the United States Constitution. Thank you very much.
Well, let me start in at the end. I'll tell you what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of Japan. I'm afraid this country is falling behind scientifically. We're raising a nation of scientific illiteracy. We've got to stop that. And the way to stop that is not by telling them, teaching them about supernatural events. That's simply not the job of science. What we have to teach in science courses is how to think scientifically, how to make measurements, how to doubt everything, how to test everything. Last year, the first time in history, the top 3 companies obtaining American patents were not American. There was no Xerox, there was no General Motors, there was only Honda, Toshiba, Canon, Mitsubishi. These were the top companies getting American scientific patents. So that's what I'm doing. That's why I don't want to weaken our already weak scientific programs in the schools. Now let me go back to some of these questions. I couldn't do it in 15 months. Let me see what I can pick out. We can't theorize about the past? Of course we can theorize about the past. We've all seen John Wayne. He's tracking down the baddies. He comes galoping through the mountain pass, and there's an old campfire. And he bends down and feels it, and it's warm. And so he knows this is not an old campfire. This is something the baddies have lit, and he's on their trail. That's what we're doing with the universe today. We're feeling the warmth of the Big Bang by measuring that radiation I talked about. The radiation is homogeneous where it shouldn't be homogeneous? Who knows? We know the overall basic concept, but we don't even know that. The best explanation we have is that there was a Big Bang. The details of it we don't know at all. Dr. Gish said these people sending up rockets were, quote, hoping they will find homogeneity. These are my friends. They were not hoping they would find anything. They were looking to see what they would find. That's the difference between science and tales of the supernatural. We don't know what happened. We're trying to find out. We bloody well don't care what the answer comes out to be. We just want to know what it is. The statement was made that children must think as atheists if you give the scientists their way. You know, I've said this over and over again. Science simply doesn't talk about God. It doesn't argue about it. It doesn't maintain that creation, that the universe, that anything was done without God. It simply says, I don't know. I don't talk about it. He talks about evolution as coming from genetic mistakes. Could God do such a cruel, horrible thing? Again, bringing God into the argument. Leave God out of the argument and take a look at this world. Yes, it's a cruel, horrible world. There is a disease called elephantiasis, which you get when you're infected by the improper organism. And your skin thickens, and your limbs swell, and your genitals swell. The male scrotum becomes as big as a soccer ball. You can't move. You're in constant agony. 600 million people have elephantiasis. It's a cruel world. 1 million babies die of malaria every year. It's a cruel world, a horrible world. Hans Alfvén is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who has ideas which contradict the Big Bang. Alfvén claims that he has trouble getting his ideas published. I am an editor of a scientific journal. I am familiar with Alfvén's ideas. He does have trouble getting them published because he is a cantankerous old snot. I'm sorry, the man is brilliant. But he writes the same thing over and over and over again. And he gives you this article, which is revolutionary, which is contradictory to our ideas, but which is brilliant, and it's published. And next week he sends you the same damn article. He turns it around a little bit, but it's the same thing. So of course we turn it down. We say, not that it's wrong, not that it's contrary to dogma, but you've said it before. You must have something new in order to publish. There's another sad story which I have to mention. Fred Hoyle was mentioned earlier. Fred Hoyle has published articles pointing out the difficulty in evolutionary theory by simple probability of putting together all these things in the proper order. First of all, those articles were published. That's how we know about them. Second of all, Fred Hoyle is one of the 20th century's greatest astrophysicists. He should have won a Nobel Prize. It's disgraceful that he didn't. He was a great astrophysicist 20 years ago, 40 years ago, even 50 years ago. Today, he is off his rocker. And it's a very sad thing. It happens to people when they get older. And things he talks about simply don't make sense. He has just published an article in Nature, top scientific journal, saying that the flu virus comes from the sun. That's a bit of an exaggeration. But he says that when the sun is active, that's when flu epidemics come along. And he shows a great correlation. And it's not a great correlation. It's a crazy kind of idea, but it's published anyhow. Because maybe there's something there, some kind of sense. But basically, he hasn't done anything good for the past 20 years. And we're all very sad about it, because he is one of the great, great minds of the 20th century. I think it's very unfortunate to bring in his presentability as an argument for anything. Let's talk for a minute about the probability of these very complex processes. It is true that if you look at any aspect of life and say, before it happened, what's the probability of it happening? The odds are vanishingly small. You say, gee, that's never going to happen. But the same is true with every one of us. We are born when a sperm gets together with an egg. And if it's a different sperm and a different egg, we're going to be different people. Now just figure out how many sperm each man creates in his lifetime and how many are actually used. Dr. Gish accuses me of saying, hey, this is an inefficient universe if we use evolution. Boy, it's inefficient. How many sperm get used? 2 or 3 in a man's lifetime. Out of billions, trillions, uncountable numbers, the rest are all wasted. Every month a woman puts out an egg. How many are used? The rest are just wasted. It is a wasteful, inefficient universe. That's a fact. Now, if you think of the probability before you are born, that particular sperm will interact with that particular egg, it's a vanishingly small probability that any one of us will ever exist. But we exist. This notion of vanishing small probability is simply not an argument. It's true. It's not an argument. In talking about life on Mars, Dr. Gish said that I said that in order to have life, all you need is energy coming in, that's all. This again is the sort of thing he does so well. He oversimplifies so that it's immediately comprehensible, but it's wrong. It's not what I said. It's not a question of simply energy coming in, that's all. Energy can be destructive. If you are zapped with a bolt of lightning, you're not going to turn into Captain Marvel. You're going to be disintegrated. On the other hand, if you're cold and you stand by a fire, you are warmed by the fire. You are not destroyed by it. What you need is the right sort of energy under the right sort of conditions. Ultraviolet light coming from the sun consists of high energy radiation and it's deadly. That never started life anywhere. What we need is the gentler light, the visible light, which carries less energy. So then he raises the point, well, on Earth, we're closer to the sun. Before there was life, there was no ozone layer. And this is true because the ozone layer is a product of the living process of the photosynthesis of plants. So initially, the Earth was bathed in this high-energy ultraviolet radiation, which is destructive to organic molecules. So how did we come about? In the oceans, that's where we came about. Because the oceans shielded the ultraviolet light. They absorb it. The ultraviolet light does not penetrate very deep into water. And therefore, the first life on Earth must have originated in the oceans. Otherwise, it would have been immediately destroyed by the ultraviolet radiation. On Mars, there are no oceans. Now, there may have been billions of years ago, and life may have formed there. And this is what we were hoping to see because it would be exciting. We didn't see it. But we went to 2 locations on Mars, and where there are no oceans anymore. So if there was life which originated in the oceans on Mars, those oceans are now vanished. And the only thing we might find are tiny little microbes grubbing away deep in the earth where they're shielded from the ultraviolet. We have no idea if we'll find them there or not. But to say that we have not found them and that Mars is totally lifeless, as Dr. Gish says, is to misstate the problem. Of the experiments sent there to look for life, one of them does claim to have found something that looks like life. Most people reject that notion. I've written another book which is not out there called The Third Experiment, which describes the search for life on Mars. I urge you to get a copy from the library and take a look at it if you're interested in it. Dr. Gish says a very significant number of scientists support creationism. Again, the words true and not true, in fact and not fact, are hard to throw around. You have to define what you mean by scientists. Dr. Gish earlier said it's not a question of degree. That's quite true. Most working scientists have PhDs, not all of them. It's not a necessary thing. But a scientist is somebody who does science and who is recognized by some group of scientists, as a scientist. I have an aunt who writes poetry. It's not poetry. She sends it out, it never gets published anywhere. It's rhyming words, it's doggerel. It is not poetry. She is not a poet. There are people who do things that look vaguely scientific. They are not scientists. Every single top scientific institution in the civilized world has come out strongly, unanimously against creationism being taught as a science. No one argues about it as religion, but it is not science. The American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Geophysical Union, the American Physical Society, the American Mathematical Society, anything you can name. I don't know who this 20% of scientists are that he claims, but I guarantee you this, there isn't a Nobel Prize winner among them. If you take any group of the top scientists, they are not creationists. Because creationism talks about the creator, and that is not science. Let me just talk about a few other mistakes that were made. When talking about evolution, Dr. Gish talked about some evolutionists believing in the inheritance of acquired characteristics. This has been done with for a long, long time. Nobody now believes in this. I'm sorry. You can always find somebody who believes in everything. But this is not now part of evolution. It's been proven wrong. To include it in evolutionary theory as one possibility is simply misstating the case. The Nebraska man that Dr. Gish talked about, this one tooth leading to a man, and the pictures of it that were shown, and the missing link type of thing. Where was this published? In the Illustrated London News. As far as I know, that is not a refereed scientific publication. No evolutionist, no biologist, no scientist is going to take one tooth, or one fingernail, or one hair, and say, this is the missing link, this is a new species. You don't work that way. You can find in the National Enquirer all sorts of things like that, but you won't find them in scientific journals. This is not because the man has a new idea against dogma and we won't publish it. It's because there's no basis to it. Half a minute. What should I say? Half a minute. 5 seconds. That makes it easier. I'll just say goodbye.
One more round of rebuttals at 5 minutes each, with Dr. Gish going first and then the question.
Well, Dr. Fisher said, where did life originate? Probably down in the ocean. All divine life couldn't get there. That means there's no energy there. There's no energy of any kind. No electrical discharges, no ultraviolet light. There's no energy down there. How are you going to get life evolved with no energy? The evolution of life would require an enormous quantity of energy. To form peptide bonds, the bonds between amino acids, for example, requires an enormous quantity of energy. To form amino acids requires an enormous amount of energy. Furthermore, when these amino acids join, they split out water. And all the people working in this field today are saying that life did not evolve in the oceans, because you can't have water splitting out and leaving molecules when you're surrounded by an ocean full of water. And so that has absolutely no answer to this problem whatsoever. Further, he said no scientist would believe in Nebraska man on the basis of a single tooth. Well, the man who did was Henry Fairfield Osborne, who at that time was the director of the American Museum of Natural History and a very, very famous evolutionist. William K. Gregory, Henry Fairfield Osborne, and others, leading scientists, accepted that on the basis of that single tooth. Yes, they did. That's how desperate evolution seemed to be today. Now, he said, may I just point out, I have tried to sit here tonight and see what evidence for evolution Dr. Fisher has presented. I can't see one iota of evidence he's presented for evolution, except that thing about the Big Bang and background radiation was absolutely, totally contradicted by the real universe. I presented the fossil record and shown that the fossil record is in direct contradiction to evolution. The second law of thermodynamics, in spite of the faith of evolution, is a direct contradiction of the theory of evolution. The laws of probability, direct contradiction to the theory of evolution. Yes, we can know something about the past. Yes, we can. I believe we can. And the fact shows certainly that evolution has not taken place on this planet and could not take place. Now, he said we're falling behind in education. He's worried about that. So am I think the reason we're falling behind in education, American education, we've been indoctrinated, brainwashed in evolution for the past 50 years. It's not creation is the problem. Putting creation in public schools, that's not the problem. It's the fact that our kids are being indoctrinated in this theory, which Soren Lovetrop, this famous Swedish scientist, says is the greatest deceit in the history of science. I talked to a young lady the other day. Took 3 years at San Diego State University and finally quit. She said, I took a course in biology. All I was taught was evolution. I wasn't taught any biology. I was just taught evolution. If we're going to spend all of our time in the classes teaching about evolution, how are we going to teach biology? How are we going to teach botany? How are we going to teach good physics? How are we going to teach a good education? I think we ought to get back to the basics. We ought to get back to good education instead of wasting so much time drawing up these phylogenetic trees, which everyone will eventually be thrown out and have been thrown out, and you come up with various theories on the origin of the universe, which are soon gone, and so you sit there and you spend just hours and hours and hours thinking about these things, and what's happening to our educational system? It has literally gone to pot. Now, he said that his friends didn't hope to find life on Mars. Well, they certainly expected to. Whether they hope to, I don't know. He made a point that this is a cruel world that 1 million babies die of malaria every year. It's even worse than that, ladies and gentlemen. 1.5 million babies are aborted every year in the United States because they're taught that that little unborn baby is nothing but an animal, nothing but a fish, or something like that. They're actually teaching that in things on abortion. That it's just a little animal, it's just a fish, it has gills, and so you can get rid of it. Well, that's aborting 1.5 million babies. The cruel world that we have today, you can't blame on God, because man is rebellion and sin and rebellion against God, and I don't think we can blame that on God. He said that, what he's saying, in effect, that no creationist is a scientist, or no scientist is a creationist. Well, the way he defines science, that's true. If you're a creationist, you can't be a scientist. It doesn't make any difference how many degrees you've done. You have, it doesn't make any difference how many scientific papers you publish, it doesn't make any difference what kind of scientific research you've done. You're not a scientist, because you're not an evolutionist. Well, that's all simply the way he defines a scientist. You see, I know a Russian scientist just visited our institute the other day, has 3 earned doctorates, MD, PhD, and the DSC, the highest degree you get in a Russian university or any European university. He is an outstanding scientist. He's won 2 very coveted prizes in Russia as a scientist. He's an outspoken creationist, an outspoken Christian. Yes, you can be a creationist, be a scientist. You can be the best scientist when you're a creationist. Thank you.
Well, again and again, it's simply a question of simplifying things so that you can understand them, and twisting them because they're oversimplified. Energy in the ocean. The oceans absorb the ultraviolet, therefore there is no energy. That's nonsense. The oceans absorb the ultraviolet gradually, and the energy content diminishes, and you reach a point where there is sufficient energy to keep you warm, to bring about life, not sufficient energy to destroy it. It's not a black or white situation. The world we live in is not black and white. There are vast areas of gray. In addition to which, the bottoms of the ocean are teeming with energy of different sources. There are hydrothermal vents which bring up hot water from underneath, ultimately warmed by sunlight, but not down there. Water that is circulated down and come up and heated by radioactivity inside the earth. There are many, many forms of energy inside at the bottoms of the ocean. In the case of Nebraska Man, once again, let me simply point out to you that it was the scientific method that finally showed it was false. The scientific method works. If you come out with some cockamamie idea, you may fool some of the people some of the time, and all of the people, some of the people all the time, all the people some of the time. Eventually, the test will be performed, and the idea will be knocked out. That's Nebraska Man have done. It was. Science is a method that works within its domain of acceptability. Dr. Gish said that I didn't present evidence for evolution, and that he presented evidence for creation. He, quote, presented the fossil record. What can I say? It takes years to present the fossil record. You take, in our university, a sophomore course in which you begin to learn about the fossil record, and then a junior course in which you learn more. And then you come to graduate school and study it for years. You don't present the fossil record in 30 minutes. What you present are pieces of it. And those pieces are precisely what you want to present and nothing else. For example, the fact that we don't have the, quote, missing links. That is, I'm so sick and tired of hearing about the missing links. It is such nonsense. The fossil record is terribly incomplete. And I'm sorry about that. What can I tell you? It is. Dr. Gish himself pointed out how difficult it is to form a fossil. In his words, the fish doesn't swim around waiting to become a fossil. It sure as hell doesn't. Very tiny percentage of anything that is once alive becomes a fossil. It's as if we have a puzzle consisting of 1,000 pieces. And of those 1,000 pieces, to make it legitimate, I should say 1,000,000 pieces. And of those 1,000,000 pieces, we have 3. What are the chances that those 3, which we found at random, are going to fit together? They're not. One's going to be here, one there, one there. And all the pieces in the middle are missing. Yes, they're missing. I'm sorry, what can we do? We go out and we look for more and more fossils, but the record is terribly incomplete. He points out that theories are soon gone, and therefore they shouldn't be taught. But that's the whole point of science. We don't know what is true. When we're teaching them, we're not saying, this is true, learn it, it will never change. I teach a course on the evolution of the Earth. And I teach pretty much the same course year after year. But I never worry about the students getting the exams and passing them out in succeeding years. Because although the questions are the same every year, the answers change. That's sort of an old gag about teaching, but it's true. The answers change as we learn more and more. When I first started teaching, I was teaching about the steady state theory in conjunction with the Big Bang. I no longer teach the steady state because it's been disproven. Maybe someday the Big Bang theory will be disproven. I hope it's one of my students that disproves it. I teach them theories not to say this is true, but to say this is the best we know today. This is the best fit we have to the evidence. You go out and find something better. Finally, just one very small point. Dr. Gish said when we went to Mars, the scientists expected to find life on Mars. That's a direct quote. No. There was tremendous argumentation. Most people, the consensus was that there would not be life on Mars because there was insufficient water and insufficient atmosphere. But we didn't know. So we spent $1 billion of your tax money to find out. And we still don't know. Sorry.
Okay, I've gone through all of these, some excellent questions. The procedure is that I ask it of the person to whom it's addressed. He gets a chance to make a response. There's a rebuttal, and then there's a chance to make one response by the initial person answering it. Obviously, in 30 minutes, if we're going to get through any number, that means that either we have to have short responses or we don't succeed in the goal of getting through a large number. That's a choice that they can make. As long as it seems to be progressing satisfactorily in terms of meeting the needs of the question, I'll allow it, and that's within my prerogative. First question to Dr. Gish. If Stanley Miller had been a Christian, would he have gone ahead with this famous experiment to try and recreate the primordial soup? As Christians, should we not restrict carefully the questions we ask with our science?
The answer to that is that there are some Christians who would undertake experiments of this kind because they are what Dr. Fisher calls theistic evolutionists. There are theistic evolutionists, but ladies and gentlemen, there's no such thing as theistic evolution. Evolution is evolution, period. I mean, the atheist believes the same thing that the theistic evolution does. Its process is the same, the results are the same. So Miller could have been a Christian and conducted experiments that he did. The experiments that he performed were totally wrong. The assumptions were totally wrong. The atmosphere that he assumed was totally wrong, now known to be totally wrong. And he used lightning, which Dr. Fisher has already said won't work because it just destroys as it does ultraviolet light. And you have to go down in the ocean to do that. You can't get lightning down there. So his assumptions were all wrong, his experiment was all wrong, and it's been thoroughly discredited today. But yes, you can be a Christian and be an evolutionist. I think a theistic evolutionist, I think his science is dead wrong, and I think his theology is dead wrong as well.
Dr. Fisher.
Well, I don't know much about Christians, but I know about Stanley Miller's experiment. experiment. The important thing was not that the atmosphere was not the atmosphere that we now think is the primordial, or that he used lightning, which probably would not work. The important thing in Stanley Miller's experiment was he took inorganic chemicals, the kind you get out of the bottle, and by passing energy through them, he created organic. This leads the way to a possible origin of living things. It's the very, very beginning. It's very simple, but it's a beginning. The exact details are not important. What is important is the concept.
Dr. Gish?
The process, the method is very, very important. It's something that he made is extremely important. The results are trivial. Dr. Miller assumed methane, ammonia, hydrogen in the atmosphere, which is, we know now the Earth never had such an atmosphere. And he imposed something in his apparatus that could never exist on the primitive Earth, and that was a trap. The gases circulated through the apparatus, they got the spark, or assuming lightning, and he got some amino acids. Well, that's very trivial. A few amino acids are light years short of getting light. But he wouldn't even got the detectable quantity of those things if he hadn't immediately isolated them in a trap. Because he knew the rates of destruction of these substances vastly exceed their rate of formation. And the only way you'll ever get a detectable quantity of product is to collect them in a trap. Well, two problems wrong with that. First, you didn't have any organic chemists on the primitive Earth with trap. There's just no trap. The ocean is not a trap. The material is rapidly decomposed in the ocean, even as Dr. Fisher said. Ultraviolet penetrates the ocean and would decompose these substances. Furthermore, a trap itself is fatal to any theory on origin of life. Because if you get some products, isolate them in a trap, you're dead. I mean, that's the end of the road. You're not going to go any farther. Because why? You don't have any energy. The very purpose of the trap was to remove the products from the energy and preserve it. But then, how are you going to combine amino acids to make proteins if you don't have any energy? And if you bring in energy, what's going to happen? You're going to destroy the amino acids at rates vastly exceeding the rate of formation. The whole basis of the experiment is false. And as others have said, that based upon proven principles of chemical thermodynamics and kinetics, we can show that life could not have evolved on this planet.
Okay, next question is to Dr. Fisher. Can you, as a scientist, read through the Bible and give it a chance to be a true account of happenings based on the eyewitnesses that were there and testing what they saw? Could this be a factual happening, or is it just people through that period of history making up stories just to try and curb society in a single direction?
Okay, the question addresses my feelings, my beliefs, and I offer no scientific validity for the answer. First of all, the question addresses the question of eyewitness accounts in the Bible. So this gets away from origins. There is no eyewitness account to Genesis. The later events in the Bible, many of them have been shown to be true by field studies in the pertinent regions. And it happened a long time ago, so some errors creeped in, but it seems perfectly reasonable to me. But the question really doesn't address what we're talking about here tonight.
Dr. Gish?
Well, we're going into the past. These are processes that are non-repeatable. They happen only once in the unobservable past. Now, as scientists, as Dr. Fisher said, scientists just don't know much about it. And many things we'll never know much about a lot of things. We really will never know how much we know about what we don't know, so we'll never know whether we know anything or not, really. But the Bible has an eyewitness account. There was only one witness to creation. It wasn't any human being. It wasn't Dr. Fisher. It wasn't me. It wasn't you. It was God. God's the only witness. And there we have an eyewitness account by one who knows everything and was there. And we're sitting here and we didn't see anything and we know very little. I feel a bit more comfortable about accepting an eyewitness account from someone who was there and knows everything, than accepting these theories from people who weren't there and know very little. And furthermore, what we do know, the little we do know, is very contradictory to their theories.
Dr. Fisher?
Yes, so everything he says about the fact that we're not there and theorizing, we don't know, that's all true. It's a vast, vast area of ignorance. If you believe that Genesis is the Word of God, then you believe it. And I can't argue with that. But it has nothing to do with science. I don't want you teaching my science students that. You can teach them that in religion class. And you can teach them music in music class. And teach them poetry in poetry classes. That's wonderful. But don't try to say that's science. When you say, I believe that God said these words and that this is the truth, that's belief. And belief is not part of science.
Okay, Dr. Gish, scientists accept several methods of radioactive half-lives for dating. This fact of chemical decay seems to be indisputable. It has given us, we are told, certain evidence that the Earth is in excess of 5 billion years old. If this is so, with the same process of destruction that exists now destroying fossil evidence, 5 billion years is a long time, longer than perhaps we grasp for evolution to take place. Is carbon dating worthy of our trustworthiness? And if not, why not?
Well, first of all, the question of time, or either, really basically has nothing to do with the matter of origins. It really doesn't make any difference whether the Earth is 5 billion years old or 500 billion years old. It's not long enough for life to have evolved on this planet or anywhere else in the universe. Fred Hoyle, who Dr. Fisher doesn't like very much, I find that evolutionists like their scientists very much, and they extol them and they honor them until one of them turns against the establishment and no longer believes in evolution. Now he's senile and a few other things you see. Fred Hoyle is still mighty sharp. He is a brilliant scientist. Furthermore, Wick Ramasane, his fellow scientist who agreed with him on this and did the work with him, is a young fellow and a very well-recognized British astronomer. Boy, I lost my track. What was the question?
Basically, the concept is carbon.
Oh, yes, carbon.
The process
dating
of carbon
method.
dating.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, what we say is this, that even creationists disagree on the age of the Earth. Some do believe the Earth is very old. Some do not believe that it's very old. And so there's a disagreement there. So it cannot be an issue between creationists and evolutionists, because even the creationists take a viewpoint. What I say is this, that the evidence is equivocal. I think there's much evidence to indicate that things are quite young. And I just want to point out that what many creation scientists point out is that in the radiometric dating methods, there are many assumptions. You have to assume the half-lives have always been constant. That is, the decay rates have always been constant. Oh, that's likely so, but we don't even know that for sure. And when a rock crystallizes, maybe you assume that rock was dated at 800 million years. You have to assume that that rock sat there for 800 million years with nothing leaving the rock and nothing getting into the rock. And that's not very likely, because uranium salts and potassium salts and other things are soluble in water and can be leached out. Lead will migrate from rock to rock and will change the apparent age. And furthermore, when molten material comes up to the mantle of the Earth, it carries with it these isotopes of lead, and so forth and so on. How much was there to start with? How much has been added since? Well, you have to make a series of assumptions. Now, if these assumptions are correct, then the Earth is very old. But we have some very good reasons to doubt the assumptions, based upon chemistry and so forth, and the fact that you do get a multitude of ages that are simply thrown out, known to be incorrect. Rocks off the coast of Hawaii, dated by the potassium argon method, gave ages in millions of years, known to be only 200 years old. And so we just say the evidence is equivocal. We don't know for sure. Let's discuss all the evidence. The multitude of evidences that might suggest things are young, and discuss all of these factors, and then you can decide for yourself what you want to believe. But one thing is certain, the evolutionists must believe that things are immensely old. You can't get an acre worth of evolution in 50 million years. And so we must believe things that are very, very old.
Dr. Fisher?
I'm afraid we have here a case of intellectual dishonesty, which I have to talk about. Those rocks from Hawaii, 200 million years old, I was the one who measured those inches. And I did not measure them and say these rocks are 200 million years old. I measured them and said these are examples of rocks which are not amenable to potassium argon dating. And I pointed out exactly why they were wrong. What you have in radioactive dating is not a series of assumptions, but a very complicated process. And you don't simply throw your rock into a machine and out pops an answer. You have to study the rock very carefully. You have to make many kinds of measurements to find out if these things that Dr. Gish mentioned happened or did not happen. But it's not assumptions, it's measurements. And we found in these particular rocks that the argon was trapped from underneath and didn't get a chance to escape. And this gave erroneously high ages. And we published this. And the reason I say this is intellectual dishonesty is when I last argued on this topic some 5 years ago with Dr. Morris, a colleague of Dr. Gish, the same point was brought out, and I pointed this out to him and sent him a copy of the article. And now we still hear the same story, even though they know it is wrong. Incidentally, the Earth is not over 5 billion years old. It is 4.5 billion years old.
Well, he called that intellectual dishonesty. Ladies and gentlemen, they know something like that must have happened. Of course it included argon. I don't question that. But now you have another rock over here. You don't know how old it is. How do you know whether that rock included argon when it crystallized? Or how do you know whether some argon leaked out of it or not? How do you know that? How do you know that the date you're getting is correct if it agrees with what you assumed to be correct in the first place? I don't think that's very scientific when you can pick and choose in that sort of method. We're not being intellectually dishonest. We know what the claims were, but the point is, rocks known to be very young gave ages and millions of years, and that multiplied examples of that. We have lavas on the top of the Grand Canyon, have to be younger than the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon, no evolution believes the Grand Canyon any older than 65 million years, and it gives an age of 1.8 billion years. Now, obviously, something is wrong. But I'm saying is this: how do you know when you get a date whether it's correct or not? Why, what you assume to be correct. I was talking to a young paleontologist at Los Angeles Natural History Museum. He didn't know I was a creation. We were talking about many things. And he said, now, if I send in a sample to be dated, and if I think it's 10 million years old, they tell me it's 5 million years old, I'm not paying attention to it. I just throw it in the wastebasket. Well, what kind of science is that, you see? And that's what we're saying here. It's the picky and choosy method. You just assume something to be correct, and everything that doesn't agree, you simply discard. Of course the dates that you get agree with what you assume to be, because that's the only thing that you will accept. And I say that's not dishonest. I just don't think it's very scientific.
May I have one sentence on that? I teach a course in geochronology to my students. It is a year-long course, and it teaches them how to analyze the rock to determine before you make the age whether or not the rock is suitable for dating. It is not a question of assumption. It is a question of very careful experimentation.
That's not exactly true. I heard, I think it was Garnis Curtis described in dating something where they actually separated the crystals out according to size. And then they dated it, and they got various dates. One set of crystals gave the date that they wanted. They then assumed that that was correct. And that is done very often. I don't think you can really predict. Certainly, the Grand Canyon, I think, is giving examples of that, where you take samples from various places in the Grand Canyon, and you're getting these billions of years in rock that really can't be that old, you see. And I know what these assumptions are made. I know how these people operate. But I just don't think it's good science. And furthermore, there are many, many processes that establish an upper limit that are much younger than that. And they're just simply ignorant.
We'll never settle this here. I'd like to jump in. We'll never settle this here. It's a very complicated situation. What Dr. Gish says is simply not true. These are not assumptions. You don't do this sort of thing. Anyone that would do what he says is a very poor scientist.
Okay, the next question is one that popped up several times, and obviously an area of concern to this audience. This was directed to Dr. Fisher. Many school textbooks persist in the dogma that evolution is a fact supported by a broad array of undeniable scientific proofs. Research of many reputable scientists has cast great doubts on many of these basic tenets, yet our educational materials leave these controversies hidden to the average student. Now there's a series of questions with one basic thrust, of course. Do you feel that the scientists have been ignorant of or apathetic to the many half-truths or hoaxes existing in our scientific textbooks covering evolution? If so, do you feel corrective action should be taken? And finally, in what way? There was another one that indicated that the daughter's college textbook indicated that evolution was fact, and the word fact was underlined. So the thrust appears to be in these questions. Should it be stated that this is not a fact, but rather a theory?
There is not a contradiction between the words fact and theory. It's not an either-or situation. There are very few things that we can be sure about. I promise you, one of the things we can be sure about is that evolution has taken place in that living things were originally very small, very simple, and have progressed and digressed and formed this vast panorama of life. How they did it, I don't know. The details of how they did it, the rates at which how they did it, the mechanisms, these are all subjects for argumentation, for further experimentation. But I'm afraid that there's no way I can sugarcoat this pill. Never in your lifetime or mine is the theory of evolution in its broad aspects going to be overthrown. It provides a coherent framework for biology. It is a necessary part of biology teaching. Part of biology teaching must always be to question, and to question the framework and the theory and all of that. And students in doing this may push our knowledge further. But in any way to suggest that evolution did not occur on Earth is simply totally wrong. As I mentioned before, when the top scientists in the world were gathered by NASA to discuss life on Mars, the possibility of it, they disagreed on everything except that the one criterion for life is evolution. All things evolve, and there's no way out of that.
Dr. Gish.
I congratulate Dr. Fisher on his faith, what he believes. He has tremendous faith, but it's an irrational faith. He's just stated his faith, his belief. He believes that evolution will never be disproved. He believes evolution is true. He believes. Hail to his belief. But it's an irrational belief. Now, he says we have these things, we know one must have evolved from the other. Ladies and gentlemen, we know at one time there were just buggies in this world, and we know later there were Model T Fords. We know that the buggy came before the Model T Ford. Then we must know the buggy evolved into a Model T Ford using the same criteria that he has used. Ladies and gentlemen, that's simply not true. We know the Model T Ford did not evolve from a buggy. We know that. How could we know if it was true? If there were intermediate points between the buggy and the Model T Ford, showing the buggy gradually changing into a Model T Ford, then we know there is a true evolution here. And we have all those invertebrates. Dr. Fisher has not even made one single attempt to explain how we have that tremendous collection of invertebrates, of tremendous complexity, tremendous array of these things without a trace of an ancestor, and then we can have all those fishes assuming 100 million years of evolution and not have one single transition form. And all he can do is appeal to the lack of possibility of fossilization. That's nonsense. We have billions times billions of fossils of those invertebrates. We have hundreds of millions of fossil fishes. What in the world happened to all the intermediates? Why didn't they fossilize? You see, well, the fact that we have invertebrates, the fact that we have fishes, is not proof that the invertebrates evolved into fishes. Not at all. The fact, if we could find some actual transitional forms showing an invertebrate actually changing into a fish, then we'd have the evidence for evolution. We don't have that. The fact that every fish that we know anything about appears fully formed exactly as predicted by the creation science, I maintain it's powerful, positive evidence for creation. And I say that disproves evolution, whether the evolutionists will admit it or not. We have proof that evolution is false. And we have many other evidences. But because of the bias, the prejudice, the demand that we believe in some sort of naturalistic, mechanistic, evolutionary origin of life and living organism is the only reason this theory survives at all today, not the science.
Okay, and Dr. Fisher, then your response will constitute the end of the questioning period.
The words that are thrown around like belief simply murk the issue. If this is a belief that I hold, I think it's very unkind of Dr. Gish to make fun of another man's belief. But it's not a belief. I mentioned before the concept of proving beyond a reasonable doubt. Let me give you the analogy of a trial again. You have a question. Did something happen? And people come in and present evidence. And eventually, you decide whether or not it has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The overwhelming consensus of everyone who has studied this is that evolution has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. I object to the word belief in this context. The man convicted of being guilty may be innocent, but does this mean you should never find anybody guilty? Eventually you have to say, look, this has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. If we are ever to make any progress in biology, if we are ever to go on conquering more diseases, we've got to finally take a stand, stop worrying this issue to death, say, yes, it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, now let's go on from here. Yes, it might be false, someday it might be proven, but I'll lay money with anybody, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, I believe you have some closing remarks.
Okay, I'd like to thank you all for being here at the debate. I did want to mention that we have the questionnaires as part included in the bulletin, and if you would take a minute to fill those out and pass those in at the end, or someone will be collecting them as you go out the doors. We really appreciate that. Also, Dr. Fisher and Dr. Gish will both be out at the tables to this side. They do have some of their books available for purchase if you like, and we'll be there to autograph if you want to, and maybe speak with them for a few minutes. So they will